Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another episode of Open Money, where we talk to real people about their real personal financial journeys. On this episode, we are chatting with Sam, and Sam has finally found a career that he loves, but he is still pursuing the FIRE dream. Let's hear what he has to say.
I'm Sam, 33 years old, and lived most of my life in a rural part of Kentucky.
All right. Well, thank you for doing this. So welcome to the channel.
Yeah, good to be here.
Thanks. What do your numbers look like?
Well, they're down from when I emailed you a couple of weeks ago. Not too bad. Um, Looks like right now I've got a net worth of just north of $50,000, and I still have I think I have about 112 to 113,000 in assets right now, and a debt of roughly, what does it look like? About 64,000.
Do you want to break down those assets and liabilities a little bit?
Yeah, sure. It's pretty easy. The vast majority of my money is in either VTSAX or S&P 500 in my 401k. So
Nice.
it's just a very VTSAX and chill kind of guy. And then
I
I've
like
got
that. That's pretty much what I do.
I've got cash is the only other thing I have. So I've got an emergency fund, and then whatever is happens to be in my checking account. So it's like a 90-10 split or so.
And then what's the debt?
The debt is all from training, pilot training. So it's around half of it is a HELOC that my
Mhm.
parents took out, and then the other half is a personal loan from my dad. All of which was to get me started in pilot training.
Oh, nice. When did you start that?
I started January of 2019, and that took about 12 to 13 months to get through that. And then I worked for an airline for about 2 years, and then I'm in training right now for sort of my first quote unquote real airline, because now I'm flying
Okay.
jets as opposed to prop planes.
Oh, nice. So is this going to be the career?
Yeah. This is kind of like an intermediate step. So I'm hired at a regional airline, and
Yeah.
so we fly the smaller jets, the 76 seater jets. The next step after that will be the big Boeings and Airbuses. With your Delta, American, United. That's kind of the end goal.
Yeah. Do you have a particular company that would be your dream one to work with? Because I have a favorite airline. I
Uh,
don't know what it's like to work for them.
that's true. Yeah, being a passenger and being an employee can be very different
Yes.
things. Generally, the first major airline that hires you is typically the one that you're going to go with, because
Okay.
seniority is everything in an airline, and that can dramatically increase your quality of life,
Yeah.
particularly as you get more senior. But if I just had to pick, I would actually say FedEx and fly cargo.
Okay.
Um, but other than that, I think either Southwest or United are probably my two top ones.
Okay. I'm a Delta girl. Actually, I have to
Yeah,
say by default because they're the only airline that flies into where I'm from. So that's just who I grew up flying. And so developed a loyalty to them.
I'm currently flying for their regional. So Delta owns one of the regional airlines, and I fly for them.
Oh,
And we actually
awesome.
have a flow to Delta, so that's kind of like the backup plan.
Yeah.
If nothing else works, eventually I do have a guaranteed job at Delta, which is really nice
Yeah,
security wise.
absolutely. Now, you said ideally FedEx. Is there a difference between, I mean, obviously passengers not on board, between flying cargo? Is there a difference in like the hours of the job, the pay of the job, anything like that versus flying passengers and cargo?
In the plane, it's no different.
Hmm.
You're just not going to make any sort of announcements, because boxes don't care whether you
Yeah.
talk to them or not. But other than that, the flying's the same. There's probably more flying at night for cargo, but it's
Okay.
not. A lot of people think that it's only night flying, but it's not.
Hmm.
I think it's roughly 50-50 for
Hmm.
FedEx, and UPS is probably the same, as well as other cargo carriers. But in terms of what I would do, it's the exact same.
Yeah. So why do you prefer cargo?
I like the idea of not having passengers. I think it's an added complexity
Mhm.
to what's already can be a relatively stressful job at certain points.
Mhm.
So that's nice. It's, I think, a little bit more laid back. There's not a focus on customer service, because there really are no customers. So it just kind of makes flying the main part of the job, as opposed to all the other aspects that I have to worry about when I have passengers behind me.
Very true. Is there any difference between pay or benefits, health insurance, anything like that?
Yeah, there used to not be, but the commercial airlines have all moved away from pensions,
Hmm.
whereas FedEx and UPS both have a very from what I understand, very strong pension.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that I looked at when I was a couple of years ago when I was deciding, what's the end goal.
Yeah.
That was very it seemed like a really good option.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to need one,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully. So it's kind of just like an extra bonus, but it's certainly an awfully big bonus that would just be kind of lumped in with all the other benefits of working there.
Yes.
Pay is I think on par with the three big, United, American, and Delta. They're all relatively similar, but FedEx does fly a lot of larger planes called wide bodies,
Mm-hmm.
the ones that typically go internationally, and those command a higher premium for their pilots. Their pilot pay is a lot higher.
That would
So
make sense.
it would be more likely that I would make more money.
I assume longer hours having to go internationally.
Yeah, yeah. The flights would be, not your 2 or 3 hour flights. It'd be your
Mhm.
12 to 14 hour flights. Fly a lot less often as well.
Yeah. I can say my added 2 cents just because I work in healthcare. UPS has some of the best benefits as far as health insurance and dental that I have ever seen in my entire life. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, between UPS and I don't think any pilot ever would turn down a job from either of those two companies.
Yeah.
It's I picked FedEx mainly because they're in Tennessee, and I like that there's no income tax. So
Perfect. I like that. So, what would a schedule look like for a typical pilot?
oh gosh, there is absolutely no regular schedule, and it changes. You bid for your schedule on a per month basis, and depending on
Okay.
what you bid, what your seniority is, and what you actually get awarded, it can vary drastically.
Mhm.
You can fly what's called a line, where you actually do for the month have a set schedule. You know what flights you're going to be on, assuming nothing changes, which something always changes. Or you can bid for reserve, where you're just kind of on call. You're either at the airport or you're within a certain distance from the airport so that you can get there within an hour or an hour and a half. So the lifestyle can change very drastically depending on what you want. If you want to stay home and not fly a whole lot, that's possible. Maybe
Mhm.
not at the beginning, because as you're a junior pilot, you're going to get whatever's left over, and typically it's what everyone else doesn't want. But as you
Yep.
get more senior within an airline, then you can kind of pick and choose, and you have the ability to drop trips. So
Mhm.
it's very flexible, but it may not always bend to what you want.
Yep. How long does it take to build that seniority?
um, It depends on the airline and depends on how many pilots there are. My first airline, there were only about 200 or 300 pilots, so I was there for about 2.5 years, and I was already in the top half of the seniority by the time I left. But at a place like Delta, for instance, they have
Mhm.
like 14,000 pilots, and it could take 15, 20 years to get to the same place.
Wow.
Um, so it depends on what base. All of your schedule is dependent on where you're based at and what your seniority is within that base. Um, so it can take a long time, and so that's why it's very important to try and get to your final destination airline as quickly as possible, so that by the end of your career, you have the quality of life that you would want.
Yeah. Would you be comfortable discussing what your current pay is and what it could grow to over the life of a pilot?
Yeah, sure. It's public knowledge. There's a handy website that lists, I believe, every American or U.S. airline, and it's got what the pay is based on what your position is, first officer or captain, and what your seniority is.
That's
Right.
exactly my husband's in the military. And this conversation was super easy when we started dating because he's like, oh, I'm in the military. It's posted online. You can just look it up.
Yep. It's very similar to the military, where it's got the base pay, and
Yeah.
there are some kind of soft things that can
Okay.
increase your pay. That's a little bit harder to determine, and your pay can vary widely
Yeah.
because, again, it's just a base. And if you pick up trips, and if those trips are maybe worth more money
Hmm.
because the company really needs you to fly or something, so it can go up quite a bit from what's listed. What I make right now is just under $53 per flight hour. So
Okay.
it's not necessarily, it's if I'm at work but I'm not in a plane, I'm not getting paid technically.
Okay.
But we have what's called it's a base pay, so I get 75 flight hours of pay every month,
Okay.
regardless of as long as I fly whatever I'm scheduled to fly. Even if I'm only scheduled to fly, say, 40 hours, I'll still get paid the 75.
Okay.
So the way you can think about it is, whatever I make as an hourly rate, add three zeros at the end of it, and that's roughly what I make in a year. So I would make
Okay.
roughly 50 to 53,000 a
Easy
year. Is what
math
I'm
right
making
there.
right now. Yep.
And what can a pilot grow to? Like, Go over like what it might look like in like 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, because I feel like there'd be some pretty big jumps in there.
I should have drawn it on a piece of paper. Here, actually, I can. I've got an envelope. This is what my pay will likely look like. It's kind of like this kind of graph where you start
Okay.
out. And when I was a first officer at my initial airline, I was paid the worst I'll ever get paid, most likely. And as I
Yeah.
upgraded to captain, I made a lot more money. But now,
Yep.
when you switch airlines, you reset your seniority. So you go
Yeah.
back to first year, first officer. So
Mm-hmm.
my pay now is drastically less than what it was a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And as I go up this kind of intermediate airline and upgrade to captain, I can make a lot more money than what I did as a captain at my previous airline. And then it jumps back down again at the major
Yeah.
airline and it'll go back up. So the top, um, so I'll probably go to something like 100 to 130,000 as a captain at
Mm-hmm.
this airline. And then jump back down to somewhere between maybe 85 and 90,000 as a first officer at a major airline.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you're a super senior captain we call them Legacy, the United
I
Delta
was gonna say, is
American.
that an official term, super senior?
Super senior, yeah. uh, Not to be confused with ultra senior. Um, it really depends, but the base pay is roughly, I would say, an average of maybe 280 to $300 an hour. So maybe 280 to 300,000.
Yeah.
But there are pilots probably at every one of the legacy, the top five airlines that can make upwards of 1 million if you really wanted to push it and work
Wow.
an awful lot. We saw that even during COVID, particularly with Fedex, because they didn't necessarily fly any less because of
Yeah.
COVID, and there was a lot of vaccine shipment that had to happen, and there was a lot of cargo that still needed to be shipped. And every year there's kind of there's a list that's not printed out, but that's kind of spread, rumored that these are the pilots that made over $1 million this year.
Yeah.
So those are just the super gunners that want to make a whole lot of money that year, and you can. I'd say that's super uncommon.
Yeah.
I would say an average is closer to that 280 to 300,000 for a captain.
That's still a wonderfully paying job. I actually did not know that a pilot could make over 1 million. That's incredible.
Mm-hmm. It's possible. I don't know if I would want to do it. But I will say I think the number of hours that I worked last year as a captain for the really small airline, I
Yeah.
think that's the kind of work I would have to do to make $1 million if I was a top captain at FedEx, because I was doing 75 to 80 hour work weeks
Oh, wow.
very frequently. The money's out there to be made if you want, and I try not to think about it because I'm not there and I'm not
Yeah.
even close to being there. So I'm just trying to do the best that I can with what I have right now, and hope that everything kind of falls in line if I put in the work.
I'm sure it will. Well, how'd you get into being a pilot? What was your interest?
Oh man, that's a hard question to answer succinctly. So I was an engineer in college,
Mhm.
and I got out in the workforce, and I absolutely hated it. My mental health took a big decline. I couldn't stand sitting in a cubicle doing things that I couldn't care less about, and I knew that wasn't for me. I was dating a medical school student at the time, and she got into med school. We got married the summer during after her first year,
Mhm.
and I decided to move around with her as she was doing her rotations and as she graduated and she ended up joining the Air Force, and we moved to Ohio to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for her first year of residency.
Nice.
And uh, so I just kind of worked random jobs.
Yeah.
I counted. I was as I was kind of thinking about what we might talk about. I was trying to recall every job that I've had so far, and I think I've had 17 jobs
Oh, wow.
in my life so far. Most of them just a minimum wage,
Mhm.
kind of just to help pay the bills. Trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I had a best friend who joined the Navy and became a pilot, and I had a German foreign exchange student who lived with me in high school, and he was a helicopter pilot.
Mhm.
Um, and so I thought, maybe that would be something I would be interested in, since my friends are interested in it and we're
Yeah.
fairly similar. And I took a discovery flight in. There's a guy who lives about 20 minutes away from my parents, and he has a grass strip in his backyard. And I called him one day and said, "Hey, are you still doing lessons?" And he said, "Yeah, if you can be here in 20 minutes, we'll go up." And I said, "Okay, sure." We hopped in his plane and we went up, and I thought, well, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, I'll give this a shot. So kind of fast forward to January 2019. I was sort of freshly divorced, and I was living in Japan at the time, overseas, and so I was back in the States because I couldn't stay in Japan, and didn't have any way to support myself. And luckily, my parents said, listen, you can come here, you can stay with us as long as you need. We know that you're going to work towards being a pilot. They
Mhm.
took out the home equity line of credit and got me set up. And then I just considered that
Wow.
my full-time job. And
Yeah.
so I was flying 6 to 8 hours a day for that 12 to 13 months while I was in pilot training.
Yeah.
Um, and then, I mean, it was kind of I had to do something. I didn't necessarily think that maybe I was so passionate about piloting that that was the only thing I could ever do, but I needed to get out of my parents' house eventually. I need to be able
Yeah.
to take care of myself. So luckily, I do really enjoy being a pilot. So it kind of worked out, but it was kind of out of necessity and kind of just what I had shown the most interest in up until that point in time.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, kind of just seems like you fell into the career.
Very much, yeah. I was in Japan, kind of going through divorce, and I was just at a loss. I just couldn't really do anything. And
Mhm.
I got a call one day from my dad, and he had seen in the local newspaper. He said, "Hey, this airline is looking to have pilots come and be in their training program. Is that something you're interested in?"
Yeah.
So it was really just kind of fate, just luck that
That's
got me
perfect.
to where I am.
Well, I'm glad you fell into a career you like because that's really the most important thing that you like what you do.
Yeah, at least you can stand it until you make enough money where you have the option to leave if you
Scale
want.
back. So, what are your goals going forward? I mean, whether they're professional goals, financial goals, what's the goal?
I go back and forth on the days that I have really good days. I think I could probably do this for the rest of my career until I'm in 65 is the mandatory retirement age, at least to fly in a
Really?
what we call a 121 carrier, which is all of your major airlines.
I
Yeah, you
didn't
have
know
to
they had a
retire at 65.
mandatory
It
retirement.
used to be 60,
Uh-huh.
and then they changed it to 65. I think in the mid 2000s, I want to say. They're thinking about changing it to 67, but it doesn't
Okay.
sound like it's going to go through, but it might. But it's a safety issue. They don't want to
Yeah.
have, you don't want to let people who are above a certain age, I guess, fly because it just increases the risks. And it's not super common to have somebody who's 64, 65 still flying because you have to pass a medical exam
Hmm.
on very regular intervals, and it's pretty common to lose your medical. And once you've lost it, then you're out of your job. So
Yeah.
um, but I think generally, I just want to get myself to a point where it's an option to work.
Mhm.
And if I can scale back and still work, then that would be great. But I just don't want to have to feel forced
Mhm.
to do anything on any particular day. And so my goal is just to get to the point where I have options as soon as possible.
Do you have a target age or just as soon as possible?
It's as soon as possible.
Okay.
And I'm a spreadsheet nerd.
Mhm.
And as soon as I thought that being a pilot was what I was gonna do, I thought, okay, I'm gonna sit down one day and I'm just gonna create a bunch of scenarios
Yeah.
based on the salaries that I could find,
Mhm.
kind of see where I might be able to stop. A lot of it is going to just depend on what my spending habits look like
Mhm.
as life goes forward. Right now, I have a very, very low spending amount. It was initially out of necessity. Now that I make a little bit more money, I could maybe spend a little bit more, but I'm not entirely convinced that that would make me a whole lot happier. So right now, I'm just spending as little as I can. So based off of that, I could maybe retire as early as 5 to 6 years from now, but that would be
Wow.
really, really lean,
Yeah.
very, very lean
Yes.
fire. Um, I think more realistically, I could retire more comfortably at maybe 43, 44.
Okay.
And then maybe 48 is probably where I start to get to that kind of fat fi
Yeah.
situation, which is where I would want to be at. Because even if I don't spend it would just be really nice to have the money in case I decide that I want to start splurging a little bit more.
Mhm.
So as far as numbers are concerned, I think I've had this idea of like 2.5 million or so in my head for a while. I think that's way overboard for what I'll actually need. Um,
Mhm.
the last 2 years or so, I've spent between like 15 and 20,000 a year, and I'm kind of on pace to be at that again this year. That will certainly go up at some point in the future, but I think it may also go down after that. Like maybe when I buy a house, it's going to go up
I was
for the
gonna say,
term
are
of
you
the.
still living at home right now?
I'm basically homeless, so
Oh,
I'm in hotels for training. Um,
okay.
so I don't have any rent right now at all, and
Okay.
and like we spoke about before we were recording, I'm having to go through this medical issue for a couple of weeks. I've been
Yeah.
at my parents' house, so I'm
Yeah.
kind of flip flopping between spending nights here and spending nights in the hotel room when I'm out
Yeah.
in training. I'm going to be based in Ohio, in
Okay.
Cincinnati, so
That's a very
probably
affordable place to live.
It is, and I got lucky. In my opinion, I got lucky. Others may have thought that they were unlucky to go to Ohio, but New York is where most of the new
Mhm.
pilots at this airline go, and they fly out of LaGuardia or JFK, and that can be extremely expensive to live there.
Mhm.
The other option is you can live elsewhere as a pilot. That's kind of a benefit if you want to look at it that way, and you can commute, you can fly on other airlines to get to work. That's very, very common.
Mhm.
But I think that adds stress and it adds, if you have a 45-minute commute, a lot of people hate that. Well, imagine, a 6-hour commute. It would
Yeah.
be awful.
Imagine having to get on a plane to get to your job.
So I very much wanted to live wherever I was based to make that part of my life a lot easier. And so I was very happy to get Cincinnati
Yeah.
because of the cost of living. So I'll move there in maybe a month or so. But yeah, I'm homeless for now.
Okay. And if you end up working for, let's say, FedEx or UPS, where would those have you stationed?
FedEx has bases. I think Memphis is the main one because that's their hub.
Yeah.
I think there's one out in Oakland, California. I want to
Okay.
say
I'm
there's
sure
a,
that's a
a
little bit more
base.
expensive.
Very much. There's a base out in Cologne, Germany that you can be based
Okay.
at, which is because I had a German foreign exchange student. I'd be very interested in maybe doing that for a little while.
Yeah.
There's a couple other bases. I think these are like 6 bases in total. But it's all based on, again, your seniority. So when you
Mhm.
get a class, there may be 15 or 20 other pilots in the class, and you're
Mhm.
ranked based on an arbitrary system. Like my current airline used the last four of our social security number to basis the seniority off of. And then I just got lucky, and I think, the second most senior person in my class. So I got the base that I wanted, but that I could easily have been the bottom.
Yeah.
And then you just get whatever's left over. So typically, the more expensive cost of living areas are the least desirable, and so
Yes.
usually the junior least paid pilots get sent there. So it's kind of an unfortunate scenario, but I would expect to probably be based not where I wanted to initially, but then as your seniority builds up, maybe get to Memphis eventually.
I feel like that's how any job that has like seniority works. Like if you start as a medical student, you get the worst shifts and then eventually
Hmm.
work your way to a better shift. So I can see that.
Yep.
I guess what's your investing philosophy or like how do you think about money?
Well, like I said, I'm very much a VTSAX kind of
Hmm.
guy. Um, I didn't really. I guess I think I got kind of lucky because I didn't ever get into stock picking.
Hmm.
Um, Investing was just not even in my vocabulary up until I was maybe 26 or 27. I didn't really start thinking about it until I looked at my ex-wife's medical debt, and
Hmm.
it was like $250,000 in debt. And I thought, how in the world are we going to pay this off? And so that's when I first started getting interested in it. And I came across White Coat Investor. I think was the very first
Yes,
sort of
my
online
brother.
presence.
My brother actually introduced me to him. He's a medical doctor as well. And yeah,
Okay.
we are very familiar with the white coat investor.
Yeah. And I joined his forum and posted on there a little bit and read all of his blogs. And then eventually he started his podcast and
Hmm.
listened to those. And I still regularly listen to him. I was actually on his podcast. He has a Milestones to Millionaire podcast. And I just like talking about money. So I applied and chatted with him for a little while about it.
Awesome.
Um, and his philosophy, I think it just sat well with me. I thought, yep, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And he just likes to diversify, buy all of the market. Now he also buys international, and he has a lot
Mhm.
in real estate as well. And I'm just not to that point. So I just took what was useful for me, and I thought, yeah, total stock market index fund, that makes perfect sense. As I transitioned from thinking about having a medical spouse to then being on my own, then I kind of branched out to more general financial independence
Mhm.
media, and I got into Choose FI, and I got into the Money Guy podcast,
Mhm.
and found your channel as well as other channels, and everything kind of seemed to mesh with what the White Coat Investor was saying,
Yeah.
maybe with smaller amounts of money, but the same
Mhm.
concept. So I felt comfortable continuing to just kind of shovel cash into VTSAX or an S&P
Yeah.
500, whatever was available to me. So it just makes sense to not ever try to beat the market or time the market. Just when you have the money, put it in, sit for 10, 15, 20, 40 years, and
Yeah.
then profit.
I love it. That's the same approach I use. So yeah, I 100% agree with that. That's how I think about it too. And I love that you said white coat investor because I think I've been following him for like 10 years or something. I don't know, a long time. He's like an OG for me
Yeah.
and I love him.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you would like to add?
I think I'd like to touch on where I was at, I guess it's been 2 years ago, I guess, when I first started out with my first job. And I just kind of want to give some hope to anybody who might be watching that
Yeah.
is in a situation where they have very little and they're making very little, and that can be daunting. So I started journaling everything from the day one of being hired at the airline.
Mhm.
Because I wanted to be able to look back and think, wow, this is where I started, and so I made sure to kind of write down where I was financially and what my plans were, and I do an update every 2 or 3 months or so, and I just go into Google Docs and I kind of type out what my thoughts are and where I'm at. And I looked last night, and I wrote down that on day one of being hired, I had $711.82. That's all the money that I had in my checking account. I think I had like 13,500 in a Roth IRA, but I also had, I think I started out with $75,000 in debt.
Yeah.
In that first year that I worked, I made $30,000 with the COVID stimulus. So it really wasn't a whole lot. But I was gung ho on being in charge of my financial life. I was, as the money guy would say, I had this army of dollar bills, and I wanted to deploy those soldiers in the most efficient way possible. And I was able to save a little over, what was it, 15,000, almost 15,500 that first year.
Wow.
So I lived very, very lean.
Yeah.
Didn't spend an additional cent that didn't have to be spent, and save the rest. And just the immense freedom and independence that I felt, even though I wasn't making a whole lot of money, the improvement that I made in my financial life that year, I just felt so proud of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a huge, I don't know if it was a turning point, because it was me kind of putting my plan into motion, and what I wanted to happen happened. But it was just a really empowering sense of being in charge of my own life. And that was really nice. So I would just say to anybody who's like I was, and just I had a ton of debt and I didn't have any money, that it can and does get better. And the best thing you can do is arm yourself with the knowledge to make a reasonable plan and then just enact on it. And it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, it took me a year I think I put maybe like $1,500 in my 401k that year, because I didn't have an emergency fund. I had to do all of these basics. But once I got that foundation set, I just felt such optimism for the future. And that was a really big deal to me at that point, because I was like a relatively low point in my life in terms of like my mental health as well as my financial health. It was all just not very good, but really taking charge, ownership of the position that I was in, and making good decisions. It ended up being really, really good. So I just want to pass on that optimism to anybody who may be in a similar-ish state to what I was in a couple of years ago.
I love that. And I think that's so applicable to everyone, just because we've all had those times in life where just nothing is going your way and everything's just kind of like shit hits the fan and just like, I can't win. But I think if you can throw yourself 100% into something, you can turn it into something great. And I mean, you're a testament to that. That's incredible.
Yep. It'll be interesting to kind of switch. I'm still very much in a don't waste money mindset. And I think I am right on the line between cheap and frugal. Yeah. And I don't particularly like being that close to cheap. Being cheap doesn't feel good, doesn't sound good. Nobody likes to go out with the cheap guy. So I don't know. It's just balancing my goal for having those options and being financially independent with enjoying the journey to there. And if that takes 10 or 15 years, that's fine. I just need to pace myself maybe a little bit more. But I still have a lot of debt. And so I think for now, I would rather be cheap and get the debt paid off while also aggressively investing. And then just be mindful of the fact that, okay, I need to make sure that I'm not being so cheap that it's costing me in other areas of my life.
I mean, I'm very, very frugal. I mean, there's probably been times in my life where I've been cheap, for sure. I feel like I'm better now, but if we're using a money guy quote, I would think it took like 15 years of hard savings to really let my foot off the gas and like start to be okay with spending and like switching from saving to spending. Even when I say that, I mean, I still strive to save like 50% of the income. Like that shift to me was so hard. And like, I still have to remind myself, I'm like, it's okay to buy something, because I'll throw something in my cart and I'm like, well, I guess I'm never going to buy that. That can sit there. I don't need to spend the money. It's not a necessity. But learning to buy something just because you want it is a hard skill for someone driving hard towards a financial goal, I think.
It is. I implemented, I think a lot of people do this, or at least people who are money conscious. I made a spreadsheet, of course. Everything starts with a spreadsheet.
Yep.
These are all the items that I want. These are the prices listed. These are the prices that I've seen them as far as the lowest. And then
Hmm.
I rank them, on intensity of how much I want them, from 1 to 10. I've got a graph that
Yeah.
kind of charts out, and I try to make sure that at least 2 weeks go by before I actually buy something.
Yeah.
And I've had this list of items that I want for maybe 2.5 or 3 years now, and I think I've maybe purchased like 8 of them or something, and I've just forgotten about the rest.
Yeah.
So just trying to make sure that if I'm going to buy something, one, I don't, if I'm going to buy something, I don't want to buy it cheaply. So while I say that I'm cheap on the stuff that I really care about, I don't
Hmm.
mind spending more extravagantly as long
Hmm.
as I'm very sure that it's going to bring a lot of value to my life. And
Yeah.
so if I still want it pretty badly after 2 weeks or so, or whenever it is that I think about it, but at a minimum 2 weeks, then I
Yeah.
think, okay, I think this is a good option, and I'll purchase it.
Perfect. I think that's a great approach. I mean, I do wish lists all the time, and I think I probably buy just a couple items from them. I'm kind of just like that because you forget about half of them. So if you forget about it, it
Hmm.
wasn't that important.
Yep.
Any final words?
Um, I don't think so. I mean, it was just nice to kind of get on here and chat. Like I wrote in my email, I mean, I think about money pretty much every day. I think about retirement.
Hmm.
I look at my spreadsheets fairly frequently. I try not to focus on what the actual numbers are, but more so the trends and what my savings rate
Yep.
is. Particularly my savings rate. I really focus on making sure that it's up to snuff, whether
Mhm.
my net worth is going down or up. I don't try not to care too much about that, but
Yeah.
it's just nice to get on and chat with other people who are as passionate about saving for retirement as I am, because it's just a big hobby of mine.
Yeah. Same here. That's why I do these, honestly. It's just fun to chat with people.
Yep.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Sam is a wonderful example of how you can take control of your finances and take control of your life, because honestly, life feels better if you're in control, if you're in the driver's seat. And also, he's a fellow indexer, so what's not to like about that? If you guys like the Open Money series, maybe you want to be a part of it. If you want to talk about your money journey, net worth, income, how you save, how you view money, I'd love to feature you. All you have to do is send me an email at erintalksmoney@gmail.com and we'll get it set up. I post new videos every single week. If you get anything at all out of these, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I hope you have a good one. I'll see you soon. Bye.